Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We are joined by a very knowledgeable and insightful group of panelists today. You should have heard the discussion we just had leading up to coming here on stage. I've learned so much already. So this is on recruitment and retention. I think something we can all identify with, whether you're a manager looking to attract top talent, or you yourself are looking to break into the industry and find the job of your dreams. So let me introduce our panel. We have right next to me Michael Pham, account director for LinkedIn, Dan Shelley, president and CEO of RTDNA US, and Eileen Chadnick, principal at Big Cheese Coaching. Thank you all for being here today. I do want to point out we are going to leave some time at the end of our discussion for your great questions from the audience. So why don't we just dive right into it? I mean, you can't talk about recruitment without talking about ways to recruit, and LinkedIn is obviously an essential tool now more than ever. So Michael, can you give us some best practices or tips on how to use it effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think oftentimes when we think about recruitment and we're looking for very specific job titles, the common mistake is to solely pick that job title and look for individuals that match that job title. But really what we're looking for is the experience and the skill sets. So when you use the LinkedIn Recruiter platform, though that might be a jumping off point, is to search the title, we want to ensure that we're actually looking for the skill sets, just because every organization titles their roles differently. And simply because they have a different title doesn't mean they're not a good fit for the job. So with that being said, I did prepare a little bit of a PowerPoint, if they could put it on the screen. And I can kind of just walk you through if you ever used this platform before. So this is what our recruiter dashboard looks like. Just for the purposes of a quick demo, I've put in there as a job title, as a starting off point, as a journalist in Canada. As you can see, there are tens of thousands of results. But we want to ensure that, again, we're kind of reducing that number and being able to sift through to find the right talent. So then if you move forward, this is where I would typically recommend for you to live in, is the keyword box. Forget all of the other filters. The keywords, because the reason I use this more so than anything else is because every LinkedIn profile is different. People put different skills, people put different experiences, and they write things differently. So if you notice there, I wrote writing and reporting, and then I put into brackets and quotations different ways to include different words that might be written differently on different profiles. Again, we don't want to exclude someone simply because they wrote something differently. So again, utilizing that keyword search will help you effectively find the people you're looking for based on their skills and experiences, and not so much their title or where they've worked. And then, as you can see, that dramatically dropped the results down to about 800 plus, I think it says. But yes, again, the goal is to get that number as close to a number that's manageable, that you have enough bandwidth to actually go through and view those profiles, and then identify the right fit. So going back to what I said earlier, if you remove the job title, now the results increase. People might have different titles. They might be a reporter, but they have journalism skills. They might be doing other things. And so again, I don't want people to, focus on the job title. I would rather you focus on the skills. And if you're saying that, obviously there are still thousands of results, if you click advanced search, we could also do years of experience. So by doing that, again, narrowing that down, it will enable you to effectively find the right talent, the years of experience to get you what you're looking for. So now, again, we've now narrowed that down further, and I've also now removed the job title. And by removing the job title, again, you see more results. So again, to dilute this further, we'll pick a location of the GTA to kind of dilute that further, be very specific. And then if there were job titles that you're getting pulled up that don't match what you're looking for the purpose of this demo, I chose media relations. You could actually exclude titles in your search. So then anyone with that title now has been excluded. And again, same thing goes for companies. Obviously, there's going to be a bunch of journalists who currently work at CTV News as an example. So we'll exclude people who currently work there to kind of pull those results further to shortlist that even better for you. And that's pretty much it. I just wanted to run through a quick demo. I know there's a lot of discussion points, but if there were any recruiters that want to utilize that platform, that's how I would recommend them to do that.
That was great. Thank you, Michael.
No problem.
So let's keeping the theme of recruiting and finding the best people. Dan, I'd like to pose this question to you next. And although this is a U.S. study, I'm sure a lot of us in the room can relate to this. So a recent RTDNA Syracuse University survey found that 90% of news directors said it was more difficult to recruit and find team members now more than ever. Do you feel this is reflective of the U.S. media landscape? And what are some contributing factors, perhaps?
I think it's reflective of U.S. society writ large, but specifically the U.S. media landscape. And I blame what I call the terrible trifecta of 2020. And that is COVID, first and foremost, and then the long overdue racial reckoning that occurred post the George Floyd murder, and then our country's 2020 presidential election, which was not normal in any sense of the word. And you're still seeing the effects of it play out in courts and in demonstrations today. But what happened in 2020 is that journalists suddenly had to completely adapt how they did their jobs and how they fulfilled their solemn obligation to keep their communities informed. Their stations or companies would build studios in their homes or remote hookups in their homes, usually on Zoom or Google Meets or Teams or whatever. Skype was a big one that CNN was using. And that was great in a way because you could stay out of the newsroom, not risk or minimize your risk of getting COVID. You could be with your family and you could help protect and nurture your family going through this horrible time. But then you get a call from the news desk saying, I know we set up a studio for you, so can you do a live hit at 11 p.m. and then another at 4 a.m. and then another at 7 a.m. and another at noon? And it just became so burdensome on so many journalists. And nobody did that. No assignment manager or producer or news organization executive did that in order to try to find some new economy in the business or to try to, there was no nefarious purpose to that. It was just everyone was adapting to this new reality at the time. And as a result, burnout increased rather than decreased. And it became so much more difficult than it had been before to retain high-quality journalists.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely right. And so now more than ever, it is really important what we do as employers to make sure that we make our roles most attractive to candidates. So Eileen, this next question is to you. How do we do that as employers, and how have the needs of the emerging workforce evolved?
Well, so, you know, there's been a little discussion on how do you get the good ones, and then the next question becomes, how are you going to keep the keepers? Mm-hmm. And it's really multifaceted, and it's important to understand that there's been a huge shift in how people see work, how they situate themselves in work, and their orientation. And so a careerist is looking for roles if they are differently than somebody who's looking for a job, and it's a bit more of a transactional. They're looking for, how is this next experience going to meet my needs? And my needs are different from previous generations. From a career point of view, my needs are, will my this role help me get to the next level? Will it expand my skills? Will it expand my visibility? Am I echoing or am I okay?
No, you're good.
Oh, I hear an echo. And how will I, you know, my leader, who will be having my back? Who will I get to learn from? And then let's not forget this other small little teeny piece that's been shrinking over the years called life. Will there be time for me to have a life? And so increasingly, keeping the keepers means you really have to understand what today's talent needs and wants. And then, how do you provide that? And that really speaks to, are the leaders equipped today to be not just a mover of news and get news out the door and do all the good stuff that you do, But you have to see yourself in a different lens with a different role, as it's increasingly it's human leadership. And there's a whole vast array of new skills. There's been a sea shift away from command and control, get everybody in their ducks and assign and tell and prescribe. Increasingly, today's leader needs to coach more, connect more, human being to human being, create collaboration, create more team-safe cultures, and often in remote, even with remote. So there's a lot of new things that leaders need to learn how to do, and they weren't necessarily taught that. So it's quite a big conversation. I'll just stop there because I have a hunch some of the questions we'll get at some of the other points.
No problem. I was just going to say, Eileen, to add to that, what's the saying? People don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses. And, previously to this, we were just all chatting about EQ and how important that is. If you want to expand on that and why it's more important now more than ever. Dan, Eileen, whoever wants to start.
Well, I'm actually certified. Is that
Go
okay?
ahead.
Yeah. I'm certified in EQ. So in the work that I do, I work with both individuals who are thinking about their next role or trying to get to the next role, but I also work with leaders, a lot of leadership development. So I'm really seeing both sides of the fence. So emotional intelligence is not like IQ. IQ is something that you kind of have, and that's what you have, your cognitive kind of ability, your potential. EQ is something that can be developed. But a lot of people, both individually and also even structurally, organizationally, don't realize that we have to invest in our growth. And what is EQ? It's personal skills, it's social skills, it's learning how to navigate the stresses of the world, it's learning how to navigate your internal world, learning how to relate with people. It's not one thing, folks. It's like it's an enormous array of skills that are developable, but they don't get developed unless you set the intentions, unless you have a growth mindset, and unless you're supported. And so increasingly what the world needs in all sectors, but especially in radio, television, news, is human leadership and even human talent that are evolving and growing these skills. And I just want to, before I pass it, because I'm sure Michael has a ton of stuff, Dan has a ton to say about this, but I just want to say you'll never, ever hear me call them soft skills. There is no such thing as soft skills. They're gone because they are now the hard, crucial, must-have skills that will distinguish people who can survive the tough stuff of work and life these days, thrive, make stuff happen, and help other people thrive. And so they're no longer soft. So if you leave this room, don't call them soft skills.
Well, there's nothing soft and there's nothing easy about it either. And all of these things we've been discussing so far have caused, and I hate the term paradigm shift, but there's been a massive paradigm shift in the industry as it relates to recruitment and retention. Bosses today, the news directors, the corporate news executives, the producers, the assignment editors have to have a lot more sympathy and empathy for the journalists who report to them. It has to be done. Otherwise, they're going to keep losing people, and that is not sustainable over time. Young journalists, and journalists at all levels of their career for that matter, right now have a unique opportunity, unique in that I have never seen it throughout my career to this extent, where you can say no. And you shouldn't hesitate to say no for legitimate reasons. Like, look, I've been working 6 days in a row. I just need a couple days off. I need to decompress. And the answer to that question from the boss should be absolutely, unless there are circumstances that make that completely impossible, legitimately completely impossible. Or a journalist should be empowered to say, I'm a multimedia journalist. I'm a one-person band. I'm not going to cover that story as a live shot on the 11 o'clock news tonight because I feel kind of creeped out in that neighborhood. We all know that safety is a huge issue right now in the local journalism community. across the United States and increasingly here in Canada. So both sides of the equation, management and the journalists, the working journalists on the street, in the newsroom journalists, have had to shift how they approach things. You know, we're seeing in the States a lot of companies go beyond the traditional employee assistance program, right? Everybody's got an EAP. You got an EAP? Yeah, I got an EAP. Everybody's got an EAP. But that's not often adequate and not often enough. So some news directors in the States are giving people time off the books. Why don't you just take 2 or 3 days? It won't count against your banked vacation time. Decompress, get away from it, come back when you feel better, especially if they've covered a traumatic situation, a traumatic story. Back in late February, there was a young journalist in Orlando in his first professional job. He had just finished a live shot at the scene of a homicide earlier that day when the gunman returned to the scene and shot and killed him, the journalist, and gravely wounded his photographer. We don't know if he'd just seen the reporter on air and that's what prompted him to come back and target him. Allegedly, he's not been convicted. We don't know. But we do know that that was an incredibly traumatic event, not just for that young journalist's television station, but for the entire Orlando journalism community. So what did they do? They brought in outside resources. They brought in outside experts. They brought in folks. They had sessions where they could just talk it out and have these cathartic moments where they could talk about, yeah, I feel afraid, and what happened to Dylan, oh my God, that could happen to me. And they talked through all these issues, and it became ultimately this is a broad generalization, and I realize that. Ultimately, in my view, the Orlando journalism community is stronger today than it was before that, because they recognized the inherent, not just dangers, but they recognized the inherent challenges of the business in today's environment, and they did something about it. They made changes to assignment schedules. They made changes to various aspects of newsroom operations so that people can feel like that they are valued as journalists while they're serving their communities. And it made a tremendous difference. And it's a shame that it took such a tragedy to come to that. But this is Orlando, where there has been a lot of traumatic news in recent years. The nightclub shooting, the political and ideological attacks on Disney by some politicians in the state of Florida. So it's been a very tough time there. And I don't want to dwell on Florida, but that is a great example of how newsrooms and news leaders can and should adapt to today's environment, and how journalists should learn to speak with their own voice, respectfully, but assertively, and not be afraid. When I was a street crime journalist years ago, you never would raise your hand and say, "I'm not. This is the 5th murder this week. I'm not going to go see another beheaded body." It's not going to do it. That was never even a concept, or a notion, or an idea. But now it should be, and it could be, and in many places it is. You have to learn to say no if you've reached your limit, and you have to know to be able to recognize when that limit's been reached.
Thank you, Dan. Obviously, very important to support our team members. So support, very important to this emerging workforce, working for good leaders, as you said, Eileen, looking for careers, not just jobs. So, Michael, are we doing enough as employers to convince candidates that our companies are the best place to be?
Yeah, I think there's a very common mistake that when we're talking about employer branding, oftentimes a lot of these organizations, they will talk about how great the organization is, how well the business is doing, but they tend to forget that when we talk about employer branding, you're marketing to candidates. And in today's world of work, it's completely different than it was a decade ago. Candidates are much more savvy. They have more demands. They expect more. They're looking for an employee-centric organization, an organization that will humanize that process and look at you as a person and not just another number. So how are we communicating that? How are we giving that first impression to potential candidates and top talent that this is a great place to work? We are invested in your career development. We're going to provide you with the work-life balance that you're seeking, provide you with the mental health that you're looking for. These are all factors that we oftentimes don't prioritize as leaders, and we forget because obviously we're looking at other more important factors, whether it be profits or whether it be, production, whatever the case is. And I think it's something that a lot of candidates now actually prioritize over compensation, over working for a big brand. Yes, you might be, for example, CTV News, but as a candidate, as a top talent, as someone who's going to give you my life, what do I benefit from? How do I benefit as a candidate? Why should I work for this organization? What does it mean for me? And so until we put ourselves in the candidate's shoes, in their experience, in their time as an employee, to echo everything that's been said about the employee life cycle, I think it's important that we provide that employer branding and not only just, say it, but actually live it and then actually execute on it, because not only will it benefit for your ability to attract talent, but again, goes back to retention. Your employees will be happier. They want to stay there. They're not going to go and leave for whatever reason. So I would just implore leaders to think about that and prioritize how they look at how they treat their employees and the space that they provide them.
Absolutely right, Michael. It's really switched from hire me because to, why do I want to work for your company?
Exactly.
Tell me more about that. So Eileen, back just keeping with recruitment, how big of a role do you see a company's emphasis on diversity and inclusion playing in attracting and keeping top talent? Yes.
What I'm seeing is, I think it's very important and very important, and it's a very interesting, evolving idea as to what is diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I've heard a lot of people say I have organizational clients, and I'm working with groups of managers, and recently, literally this week, I had somebody say, we have a situation where because we're being called on with some of the equity, diversity, inclusion imperatives, we have some employees that are afraid that they're not going to fit into the checkbox for promotions, and so I think that it's an area that's evolving, and some people are experiencing. I've met a lot of people who are no longer best before date of age, and are experiencing ageism, and that's a piece. And so, and I think there's also been a lot of conversation about, is there room in this conversation for different opinions and perspectives? So it's not only the traditional models that everybody says, we need more people of this color or background. I think it's an area that is increasingly important, but very, very complex. And from a candidate's point of view, if people don't fall into some of those areas, they have concerns, and it becomes tougher to get into organizations. So it's a wonderful thing. It's also a tricky thing.
Thank you, Eileen. Let's just switch gears a little bit to where journalists are working and how. So a 2022 survey from Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism revealed that 39% of news managers felt their organizations were struggling to persuade people to return to the office. You could argue maybe that number is even a bit higher. Dan, what are your thoughts on what works best in newsrooms? The 5-day in office, maybe a hybrid model, work from home? What's sort of being applied in the U.S.?
Well, it's a variety, right? I mean, there's even some talk of going to a 4-day work week, though a lot of executives at companies that run local newsrooms in the States aren't yet sold on that concept. But it depends on the company, it depends on the station, it depends on the local management of the station, it depends on the local news management of the station. But what we think, what I think needs to happen in order to make the recruitment and retention issue, to improve it, would be to give the freedom to each local newsroom to do what works best for it. Because a lot of this is generational too, right? Younger journalists, they, in many cases, feel like they are empowered more than perhaps young journalists of previous generations did, and so they will say, I don't want to come to work in the office 5 days a week. I'll do 3 days a week. And the news director will say either yes or no, and then there's a problem or there isn't. But I think that leaders in local newsrooms need to listen very carefully and carefully balance the needs of in-person staffing and the final product, what goes on the air, with the needs of their employees, and with a slight edge to the needs to their need to their employees, which traditionally and historically has not happened in our business before.
Yeah. And Michael, what are you seeing on LinkedIn? Is this topic, one of importance to a lot of people? Is it top of mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I said, the world of work has changed so rapidly and so significantly that how people perceive work today is a lot different than how they perceive work before. And when it comes to, hybrid work models, remote or, in on-site, I think it's just striking the right balance. Everyone's job is a little bit different, and oftentimes there's pros and cons to both. Obviously, on-site, there are individuals who just do not enjoy the commute to get in. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy to do that. But at the same time, when you're in the office and you're collaborating with your team members, you're getting effective communication across instantaneously rather than me sending a Teams message or an email and waiting forever for a response. So ultimately, I think it's striking that balance, figuring out and having that conversation openly with your employees to understand what works best for everyone involved. And I think, again, no one's going to have a perfect answer that's going to work across the board for every organization. But it's working with your team and being amenable and being like, again, just understanding what we're trying to accomplish, giving your employees trust, and knowing that, we will get to that finish line, and how we get there. This whole focus and prioritization on getting you on site every day or giving you sort of, that ability to be working from home. Again, I think it shouldn't be a huge focus. It's just everyone should be able to work collaboratively in whichever way is most comfortable that produces the results that you want. So it's always going to be an ongoing topic because not everyone perceives it the same way, but hopefully we will eventually get there.
Thanks, Michael. So last question for me before we turn it over to the audience. The pool of strong writers and producers looking for work now for a variety of reasons is now more shallow than it's ever been, arguably. Dan, how are local stations filling those roles, those entry-level roles right now?
Well, it's tough. And if you're a journalism student in the United States right now, and you want to become, or maybe you haven't even thought about it, but you should go into the producer ranks and start as a producer, because there is a dire need for producers in the United States in TV newsrooms today. And the producer puts you on the path to management rather than on-air talent, generally speaking, though not always. And there's such a dearth of producers, particularly in smaller and medium markets in the United States today, that companies are doing some pretty extraordinary things. They're trying to recruit people who aren't in the journalism industry. In some communities and some companies, they're actively recruiting displaced newspaper journalists and editors who were let go when their newspaper was bought by a venture capital firm and eliminated most of the jobs and turned editing over to AI and other things like that. So they're going to these veteran displaced newspaper reporters and say, can you please come into our newsroom? We can teach you how to produce a newscast. You already know how to write a newspaper story or a print story. We can teach you how to write broadcast. But you know what you'd be doing for us? For you, it's a whole new chapter of your career. And what you'd be doing for us is you'd be bringing a lot of experience that doesn't currently exist in my newsroom, and you'd be able to mentor all these younger journalists and help them become better journalists. And so we're seeing that to some degree. Unfortunately, another thing we're seeing at the moment, and I spend a lot of time speaking to students in journalism schools around the United States, a lot of journalism programs are now communications programs. And they tend to have more students enrolled in strategic communications majors, what we used to call PR. And there are still journalism students and people who want to write for newspapers and people who want to be photographers and people who want to be on-air reporters, but a lot of them want to be on camera. I want to be on camera. And that's fine. But you really should, I always tell you, really should consider the producer track because your career will be longer. You're much more longer to stay in the same community for a longer period of time than having to work from 2 or 3 year contract to the next biggest market, 2 or 3 year contract, to the next bigger market, 2 or 3 year contract, until you either get out of the business or retire. So, yeah, that's what we're seeing.
Thanks, Ted. Questions from the audience?
There's one over there.
Chris? Is there a mic? Oh.
Hi there. I'm the camera supervisor at Global in Toronto, and we've had some jobs open up recently that we haven't been able to get great candidates for because of, it seems like, a disconnect of what's being taught in schools and what sort of the needs are in our newsrooms. How do you see that relationship between broadcasters, media companies, and schools, excuse me, and how closely should they be interacting? Does that dynamic need to change? Because we can't find people that know how to use the camera that we're using. They teach a different style of camera that's more production-y, smaller format. So when we get candidates, they've never seen, they don't know how to turn on a camera that I'm using. So I'm sure this happens in different aspects of media. Does that dynamic between the media companies and the educators, does that need to come closer together where you're almost in collaboration on a school-by-school basis with, like, here are the skills that we need to fill our recruitment needs?
Yes, and respectfully, you answered your own question. I think that news organizations need to reach out to journalism schools to ensure that their curricula are truly reflective of what's going on in the industry today. And I think a little investment of your time and conversations with deans and professors and developing a common understanding of what's needed in the industry today, I think you can help mold those journalism programs so that they do produce the kind of candidate that you need for your newsroom. And they're generally very interested, the educators are generally very interested in such collaborations. They crave them. So don't wait to get called by the dean of a J school. Reach out to him or her or them.
Especially internships. Like in a lot of different, I've done some work with different colleges in different aspects, not necessarily in radio and television, but one of the things that tends to work well in different fields is having internship opportunities so that you have students who get to spend some time and learn, and then they're learning in your playground, if you will, and they're learning the toys and the equipment. And then sometimes those interns do get an opportunity to stay on or come back for summer roles, and that's a way to tap into talent but train them and nurture the skills that you need that complements whatever they're getting at the school.
Thanks, Eileen.
Excellent point.
Yep. Yeah. Any other? Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I'm an educator at Durham College. And
There you go.
I'm sitting beside an educator at Fanshawe and another educator at BCIT. And we have in the college system in Ontario professional advisory committees. We call them PACs. And so I invite you to contact us at Durham College. We'd love to have you on our PAC. We also have, Fanshawe as well. So for anybody who is interested in really helping shape what it is that we teach in our curriculum, find out what we're teaching, we look up different journalism schools in your area where you are hiring, and we are always looking for professional advisory committee members. We also at Durham College, I think at Fanshawe, and I think at BCIT, we also have internships. So we have a load of students here from Durham College who are three currently looking for internships. So those are pathways definitely for you to find new talent.
I didn't think I'd be a matchmaker today.
We're making connections. Great.
Again, speaking as an educator, clearly you haven't talked to Fanshawe or any of our colleges, because we change our programs to reflect the actual reality of the industry. That's what we do. We want our students to be as supported and as prepared to go right into the industry as possible. So if we need to change our camera training, we need to know that, right? Because, you know, we revise every term. I also wanted to ask you, being from the U.S., and this is probably a little bit reflective of Canada as well, so everybody needs so many people. I have a friend who's a news director in Seattle at one of the major stations, and she can't find people either. But when are the companies going to start paying more to their employees? So they retain people, because it's not just about 4-day weeks. I worked at a company in Vancouver that did the 4-day week, and it worked out really well. But they paid a living wage as well. And in the U.S., a lot of places for sure, and in smaller markets in Canada, these companies are crying for employees and good people, but yet they're not paying a living wage.
Well, and then they wonder why they don't get the people they're seeking. I will tell you that some companies that operate local television newsrooms across the United States are doing better. They do understand that there is a direct cause and effect relationship between what they're paying and whether they get candidates and are able to hire open positions. Unfortunately, there are a couple that haven't yet had that revelation occur to them. And it's also an issue of retention. It's not the best case scenario, to put it mildly, to expect to hire an entry-level television journalist at $15 an hour U.S. when that journalist literally could walk across the street and make $18 or $20 an hour working at a McDonald's. It's not sustainable, and I think companies are realizing that, particularly in the post-terrible trifecta of 2020 era, where the power really has shifted in many respects from the companies to the journalists. The power to negotiate good working conditions, to negotiate good salaries, to negotiate not just paid time off, but if I need a break, I need a break. So a lot of companies are listening. A lot of companies are making significant improvements. Some, unfortunately, are not. And the ones who are not will ultimately learn the hard way.
How do you... Oh, sorry, Liz, you take priority. Just checking. What advice would you have for overcoming location? I'm sorry, I'm back here at the back of the room. Overcoming location, because I'm a news director and I speak biasly of, I think, one of the best news talk stations in the country. We pay great wages. We absolutely look at the work-life balance that is needed in our industry, especially in the news talk format. But Saskatchewan is not a place people consider. It's not a place that a person thinks they would get a great career at. But hey, you know what? You could end up being a really big fish in a small pond. And also trying to send the message that we're not trying to squish dreams. We know people want Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, Edmonton, somewhere like that. But you're not going to get a job there until you build your resume, and you can do it at stations and locations like ours. But that message doesn't seem to resonate. So either what am I doing wrong, or how do I overcome that stigma of location?
For either of you, anyone?
Who?
Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, don't know. I think, yeah, the challenge of recruiting is so multifaceted about how do you connect with potential people. This is going to sound crazy, but my background prior, many years prior to becoming a coach and a trainer, I used to work in PR. And I'm almost thinking you need a PR campaign for life. You know, in Saskatchewan, here in the big markets, there's a lot of struggle with finding homes and the cost of living. And what I'm hearing you speak to is such a wonderful value proposition for people who are really keen on getting their career started. And one of the things we were talking about internally back in the room is a lot of people who are trying to get into roles that you're describing that you have on offer. It's like a passion and a calling, and there is a great yearning for people to get a foot in the door. And I'm hearing you say that this would be the place to get your foot in the door and start to build your experience and build your narrative. So I think that through different channels of recruitment, like certainly LinkedIn would be one, but even you know, media relations to the markets you're trying to recruit to, like try to get the Toronto people, you know, how to start to tell those stories, whether it be social media campaigns. But to me, it sounds like almost in addition to some of traditional recruitment strategies, it sounds like there's a lot of marketing opportunities to tell your story, and so that it is heard by people. It is unique, this sector. Is very unique than, let's say, trying to get an accountant to join a role, or trying to get those that enter, you know, this field do have a yearning. And I think you have a pretty compelling story, but maybe it needs a marketing campaign with different. So I'm wearing my marketing hat, my old PR hat. But even as a coach, if ever I have somebody knock on my door, I'm going to tell them to look, to look your way and to think about smaller markets, because one of the things about growing a career is to build your experience, build your narrative, and what are you willing to do that? And it also can speak to work-life balance too. Just, those are my ideas. They're half price today. I don't know if they landed.
Thanks, Eileen.
You know, there are people in our industry who thrive on the hamster wheel.
Right.
They love spending 2 years here and then moving 2 years there and moving 2 years there. But there are also people, particularly in the current environment, who just want to set down some roots and don't want to move every 2 or 3 years, and might relish the opportunity to work in Saskatchewan and have a long-term career being paid more than a living wage, with working for a boss who understands work-life balance and how important it is. You've got to find a way through marketing or other means to try to appeal to those people, because they have always existed in our business, and they still exist in our business. I started my career as a radio news director in my hometown, and I worked there 15 years until I was recruited away by a bigger market, and then worked there 11 years before I was recruited to CBS in New York. And the most fun I ever had during that time, as I look back on it, was being the big fish in the small pond in my hometown. Not because I was a big fish in a small pond, but because I got to do journalism the way I wanted to do it. And I got to serve my community the way I felt it really made an impact and a difference. And if you can appeal to those qualities in people, and they exist, then I think you'll find some success.
Thanks, Dan.
I know we've run out of time, so I'm going to ask this very briefly to each of you. The one quality that you think attracts a candidate or retains a candidate in a leader. What does a leader need to have? For the one sentence, because I know we're out of time.
You want to start, Michael?
In one sentence, that's tough. I think ultimately, again, with the newer, especially the younger generations of work, you know, we expect a lot from our leaders. You know, we want someone who leads with empathy, who understands us, who wants to see us grow. So being able to communicate that effectively, because, you know, like a pre-discussion we had previously was, you know, oftentimes people who are promoted into leadership roles, they were incredible individual contributors, they were high performers, but they were never taught or trained to lead. And I think there is a discrepancy there. We need to preemptively train these leaders who are becoming new leaders to understand what it means to lead, to know how to deal with difficult conversations, to help your staff grow, to lead with empathy, and to be more compassionate towards each other. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sure my panelist friends will have more to say on it.
That was excellent, and I could not improve on that. My answer in one sentence would be a human being.
Yeah. Yeah, we're all on the same page here, yeah. So, again, that's exactly what it is. And it sounds, I think everybody has that intent, but I think a shout-out to organizations is to equip your leaders, and a shout-out to leaders is to take it on yourself to learn what all that means. What kind of conversations do I need to have with my people? How do I show up and really create conversations that connect? Talk to my people about their careers. Your role is to be a human leader, and there is very specific growth and learning to do that across the board, not just in this sector. And so I would say take that to the next level and get real curious. What does that mean? And where is my learning curve? And organizationally, how can we support our leaders to level up?
Thank you.
Call me.
Thank you all for devoting so much time to this really important conversation today. I think we've all walked away with a lot. So thank you all. Thank you all for being in the audience. I will now segue to one of the best leaders I've ever had, Liz Travers.
I didn't pay her to say that. I promise. I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here for the last 2 days. So many takeaways. Thank you to this panel. I keep learning, and I think we all want to keep learning, and that's what these conferences are about connecting and trying to be better journalists, leaders. That's what's important, and that's how to keep our industry alive.